My wife left on a Thursday, and I only know it was Thursday because she put the note under the one clock in the house that still kept perfect time. 4 lines. No explanation. The ink pressed hard like she'd had to lean on the pen to make herself finish. I read it 11 times standing in the kitchen, and I was still reading it the next afternoon when her sister knocked on the shop door in the rain and told me there was a whole other story underneath the 4 lines, and that Lena had sent her to tell it. The note said, "I'm sorry. It was never your fault. Please believe that part. I can't keep taking from a good man. Don't look for me." I looked for the man she meant. I couldn't find him in the kitchen window's reflection. He didn't look good. He looked like someone who'd missed a step that wasn't there. My name is Theo Marsh, and I fix clocks. Watches too, but mostly clocks. Mantel clocks. Cuckoos. The big regulator types that hang in the back of churches and old banks. I inherited the shop from a man who wasn't my father, but might as well have been, and I've spent 14 years bent over other people's broken time with a loop screwed into my eye, coaxing dead mechanisms back into ticking. It's quiet, exacting, deeply unglamorous work. The shop smells of oil and brass and old wood. People bring me things that stopped years ago and ask, hopefully, whether they can be saved, and most of the time my whole job is deciding gently whether the answer is yes. I should have seen the irony coming. A man who keeps everyone else's time running, married to a woman whose clock had quietly stopped on him years before, and he was too busy listening for other people's ticking to hear the silence in his own house. Lena and I met because of a cuckoo clock, which I've always thought was the universe being heavy-handed. She brought in a hideous thing she'd found at an estate sale, slapped it on my counter, and demanded to know whether it was worth fixing, or whether she'd been swindled. It wasn't worth fixing. I told her so. She argued with me about it for 20 minutes anyway, on principle. And somewhere in the middle of the argument I realized I didn't want her to leave the shop, and I fixed the worthless clock for free, just to make the afternoon last longer. That should have told me something about myself. I am a man who will pour weeks into a thing that's already gone, just to keep it in the room. We were married 6 years. I won't pretend they were bad years, because they weren't. They were comfortable, and comfortable is its own kind of trap. Somewhere in the back half of them, Lena got quiet in a way I noticed and decided not to examine. She'd stand at the window holding a cooling cup of coffee, looking at the street like she was timing something. I told myself it was a mood. I told myself moods pass. I am very good at telling myself the comforting version instead of the accurate one. They are rarely the same version. So when the note came, the terrible truth is that one small, ugly part of me wasn't surprised. I just hadn't known the clock had so little time left on it. Cora I'd known for the whole 6 years, the way you know your wife's family. At a distance, fondly, across holiday tables. Lena's younger sister, the practical one, the one who kept lists. While Lena drifted toward windows, Cora was the kind of person who showed up to things early, with a green notebook rubber banded shut, and a pen she tapped against the cover when she was thinking. I'd always liked her in the uncomplicated way you like someone you've decided is permanently filed under family. I had never once, in 6 years, looked at her and seen anything other than Lena's sister. That filing system did not survive the year that followed. But it survived the first afternoon, barely, which is something. She came the day after the note, in the rain, and stood under the shop's awning, shaking out an umbrella, while the bell over the door did its small, bright sound. She didn't take her coat off. She set the green notebook on my counter, between a half-gutted mantel clock and my coffee, and she pressed her thumb against the rubber band and didn't open it, and I understood, looking at her face, that she'd come carrying something heavy and had rehearsed how to set it down. She's safe, Cora said first, before anything else, because she's the kind of person who leads with the thing you most need to hear. I want you to know that, before I say any of the rest. Lena's safe. She's not hurt. She's not in trouble. She did this on purpose, and she did it as gently as she knew how, which I realize doesn't feel gentle from where you're standing. It feels like a note under a clock, I said. I know. Her thumb moved against the rubber band. Click. That's why I'm here. She couldn't say the long version to your face. She asked me to. The long version is the only part that's fair to you. And she knew the 4 lines weren't fair. And then she told me the real story. Standing in her wet coat in my shop while the clocks ticked out of sync behind her, and the real story was this. Lena had known for years that she'd married me because I was safe and steady and kind, and not because she was in love with me, and she'd stayed out of guilt long past the point where guilt was a reason to stay. She'd been quietly drowning in a life that fit her like someone else's coat. There was a job overseas she'd never told me about, applied for in secret the way you test a door you're not sure you'll walk through. She got it. And she finally let herself walk through, and she'd been too much of a coward. Cora's word, said with love, to do it to my face, because she knew I'd have been gracious about it, and somehow my being gracious would have made it impossible to leave. She didn't leave because you failed her, Cora said. She left because you didn't. That's the part she couldn't write small enough to fit on the paper. She needed you to know it wasn't a verdict on you, it was a verdict on her. I didn't say anything for a while. Outside, the rain. Behind me, a dozen clocks insisting that time was still passing, which felt, at that moment, like a rude thing for them to be doing. You didn't have to come, I finally said. You could have called. It would have been easier to call. Cora looked at me, and something passed over her face, tired and honest, and unguarded in a way I'd never seen on her in 6 years of holiday tables. She's my sister, and I'm furious at her, and I love her, and I don't fully agree with how she did this, she said. But somebody had to come and sit in the room while you heard it. You don't tell a person their marriage is over through a phone. She picked up the notebook, held it against her chest like a shield she'd decided not to use. I'm sorry, Theo, for all of it. You're a good man, and this is a rotten thing to have happen to you. That landed. That sentence did something quiet to the room, not because it was profound. Because it was the first time in years anyone had stood in front of me and called me a good man like they'd thought about it. She came back a week later to help me return some of Lena's things, because Lena had asked her to handle it and Cora doesn't leave loose threads. Then she came back again, because the divorce paperwork needed a witness and I didn't have anyone else I wanted in the room for it. Then she stopped needing reasons and started just coming by near closing, when the light in the shop goes amber and I wind the display clocks for the night, and she'd sit on the stool by the counter with her notebook and tell me about her week while I worked. I told myself it was grief, hers and mine, braided together because we were the 2 people left holding the shape Lena had cut herself out of. Of course we'd cling to each other a little. Of course it would feel like something. It wasn't something. It was just 2 people who'd loved the same vanished woman, keeping each other company in the wreckage. I built that explanation carefully, and I lived in it for 2 months, the way I'd once fixed a worthless cuckoo clock just to make an afternoon last. The explanation had cracks. I started noticing them the way I notice a clock running half a second slow, a thing only an obsessive would catch. There was the coffee. My coffee is famously, structurally bad, and one evening Cora took the cup out of my hand mid-sip, looked at it with genuine offense, and remade the whole pot correctly, and the small domestic outrage of it made me laugh harder than anything had in months. There was the night a customer's antique music box started playing on its own on the bench. Some thin old waltz, and Cora and I both went still and listened to it finish without saying a word. And when it stopped, we looked at each other, and then both looked away too quickly, like we'd been caught at something. There was the green notebook, which I learned she'd started keeping for Lena and me both, a page where she tracked which of Lena's affairs were settled. And underneath it, in smaller writing, she closed the cover over when I came near, something else. And there was the evening she almost said it. We were winding the clocks at closing. She'd taken over half of them by then. Knew which ones needed how many turns, which is a frankly alarming level of involvement in a man's clock winding. And she finished a regulator on the wall and stood there with her hand still on the brass weight, not turning around. "I keep thinking I should stop coming by," she said to the clock. "You don't have to stop," I said. "Too fast. That's the problem," she said. "I know I don't have to." And then she did turn around. And she looked like a woman who just heard her own voice say more than she'd authorized. And she picked up her notebook and her coat and left without finishing the rest of the clocks. And I stood in the amber light listening to all of them tick out of sync, and understood that I'd been lying to myself for 2 months, with the same discipline I'd once used to ignore a wife at a window. It came to a head on a cold night in the early spring, almost a year after the note. And it came to a head because for once I decided to be the one who held the door open instead of the one who pretended there wasn't one. She'd come by late. The shop was closed, the clocks were wound, and she stood by the counter turning the rubber band around the notebook. Click, 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 not saying whatever she'd come to say. So I said the thing I'd rehearsed in the quiet, and I said it to give her an exit, not to back her into a corner. "Cora," I said, "you don't owe me anything. You came and you sat in the room when no one else would, and you stayed. And you fixed my terrible coffee, and you have done more than any person could ask. So if part of what's happening here scares you, and it should because it's complicated, and she's your sister, and I was her husband, and there is no clean way to hold all of that, then you can stop. We never name it. You keep coming by as my friend, or you don't come by at all, and either way I will be grateful for the rest of my life that you knocked on that door in the rain. The door's open. You can walk back through it." She went still, not dramatically, just still. Then she said the first true thing, and she said it too fast. So fast that I knew it had been sitting behind her teeth for months, waiting for a night exactly this honest. "I don't want the door," she said. "I've been trying to want the door for a year, and I can't make myself want it. I come by because the only hour of my week that doesn't feel like grief is the one where I'm sitting in this shop watching you win clocks." She heard it after she said it. I watched her hear it. Her hand came up to her mouth like she could push the words back in, and then she made herself lower it. "I know how it looks. I know exactly how it looks. I've run every version of it in that notebook, and every version is complicated, and I don't care anymore. I'd rather have the complicated thing that's true than the simple thing that's a lie. We had enough simple lies in this family." "Cora," I said. "You can tell me it's wrong," she said. Fast, again. "You can tell me I'm her sister, and you can't, and you'd have every reason, and I would understand." "I called Lena," I said. "That stopped her. 3 weeks ago," I said. "Because I'm a coward in a lot of ways, but I wasn't going to do this with a ghost in the room." I told her what was happening in my chest before I'd even said it to you. "And do you know what your sister said?" My voice did a thing I didn't plan. She said, "Finally." She said she'd hoped. She said the only thing that would let her stop feeling guilty about any of it was knowing I'd found something real, and she could not believe it had taken the two stubbornest people she knew an entire year to notice. Cora made a sound that was half a laugh and half a year's worth of held breath. She gave us her grace, I said. She didn't give us permission, because it was never hers to give. But she gave us her grace, and she meant it, and she's happy, and she's far away, and she's finally awake. So no, I'm not going to tell you it's wrong. And then I crossed the shop and put my hand against the side of her face, gently, because the first time I touched Cora on purpose, I wanted it to be a thing I'd chosen, and not a thing the grief had pushed us into. And she leaned her cheek into my palm and closed her eyes. And somewhere behind us a clock I'd been repairing for a month chose that exact moment to start ticking again on the bench, having decided, after a long silence, that it was time to keep time. I'd like to tell you it was uncomplicated after that. It wasn't. Loving the sister of the woman who left you is not a thing the world has a tidy place to file, and there were hard conversations and careful months and people who needed time to understand. But complicated isn't the same as wrong. Complicated is just true with more moving parts, and I've spent my whole life inside things with a lot of moving parts. 3 months later, Cora's green notebook had a page in it that wasn't about Lena's affairs anymore. It was a list of clocks she wanted to learn to fix, in her own handwriting, no longer hidden under the cover when I came near. A year after that, she'd half moved into the apartment above the shop, and I learned that she alphabetizes things I didn't know could be alphabetized, and that she steals the good pastry off my plate while making unbroken eye contact, and that under all that practical list, making she overthinks the quiet exactly as badly as I do, so that we'd catch each other doing it and have to laugh. Lena wrote, sometimes, from the other side of the world, to Cora often, and to me occasionally, easy letters now. The letters of someone who'd finally walked through the door she'd been testing for years. She sounded, for the first time in the entire time I'd known her, like a person whose clock was running right. Years later, when people ask how Cora and I got together, and they ask carefully, because the shape of it makes people go quiet. We don't dress it up. She says she knocked on a shop door in the rain to deliver the worst news of a good man's life, and stayed a year too long and stopped being able to leave. I say my wife left a note under the one clock that still kept time, and the next day the rest of my life knocked on the door holding a green notebook and an umbrella, and I was too busy grieving to recognize it for almost a year. We're both right. That's the thing nobody tells you about how two people find each other. Sometimes love doesn't arrive at the beginning of the story, all clean and uncomplicated. Sometimes it arrives in the wreckage of something else, in a wet coat, carrying the truth somebody else was too afraid to say. And you don't get to choose how it shows up, only whether you're brave enough to let it in once it does. Some things you wind back up, some things you let run all the way down, and then you build something new where they used to hang. Nothing important had appeared overnight. It had simply, finally, stopped hiding under 4 lines of someone else's handwriting. So before you go, I want to know 2 things, and I read every answer. The small one. Have you ever gotten a story in 4 lines that you only understood years later, once someone braver filled in the rest? And the bigger one, the one I think about every time a stopped clock starts again on my bench. How do you tell the difference between a thing worth repairing and a thing you're only holding on to because letting go feels like failure? If this one found a soft place in you the way it found one in me, stay a while, subscribe, and I'll tell you the next one.